In the small, forgotten town of Black Hollow, the villagers spoke in hushed tones about the nights when the moon rose full and red over the dense, twisted woods surrounding them. These woods were ancient, older than the town itself, with trees whose gnarled roots seemed to dig deep into the earth, as if holding on to something dark and long buried. For generations, the townsfolk had lived in uneasy peace, adhering to strict rules that had been passed down from their ancestors. Asterisk, never go into the woods at night, never stray from the paths, and never under any circumstances respond to the howling asterisk. Those who broke these rules were never seen again, and it was said that their souls were devoured by creatures older than time itself. Amelia, a new arrival to Black Hollow, didn't believe in such superstitions. She had moved there to escape the chaos of the city, looking for peace and solitude in the quiet village. The townspeople, though friendly, were guarded, and their constant warnings about the forest only piqued her curiosity. One night, when the moon was a dull, blood-red orb in the sky, Amelia found herself restless. The town seemed to hold its breath as darkness fell, and she could hear the distant howling of wolves. But something about that night was different. The howls were too synchronized, almost as if calling to one another in an ancient, predatory language. Against all better judgment, Amelia decided to take a walk. She wrapped herself in a thick coat and set off toward the forest, her footsteps crunching softly on the path. As she entered the woods, the temperature seemed to drop, and an oppressive weight hung in the air. The howls grew louder, and the trees seemed to close in around her, their twisted branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. After what felt like hours of walking, Amelia found herself at a clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, weathered by time and covered in strange, unrecognizable symbols. Surrounding it were ancient stone markers, half buried in the earth, each with names etched into them, names she recognized. They were the names of the villagers who had disappeared over the years. Suddenly, the howling ceased, and the silence was deafening. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, and draped in ragged fur. Its eyes gleamed yellow in the moonlight. It wasn't fully human, nor was it entirely evolved. Its limbs were too long, its face too distorted, and its teeth far too sharp. More figures followed, stepping silently into the clearing, surrounding her. There was something wrong about them, something ancient, feral, and evil. These were no ordinary wolves. They were werewolves, twisted and cruel, cursed to exist between worlds. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as the largest of the creatures stepped forward, its claws scraping against the stone altar. It spoke not in words, but in a low, guttural growl that she could somehow understand. "We were once like you," it rasped, "but the curse, it hungers, it consumes." The others circled closer, their eyes glinting with malice, their teeth bared in sinister grins. "Join us," the leader snarled, "or face the fate of those who came before." Amelia stumbled back, her heart pounding as she realized the truth. The villagers hadn't disappeared, they had become these creatures, twisted and transformed by an ancient curse that turned them into monstrous predators under the full moon. The eerie silence that had gripped the town each month was not out of fear, it was resignation. In the distance, another howl echoed, and Amelia felt the pull of something dark stirring deep within her. Her skin prickled, her senses heightened, and a strange hunger gnawed at her from the inside. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the creatures closing in on her, or the growing realization that something was awakening in her blood. Something ancient, something cursed. As the leader of the werewolves stepped closer, its yellow eyes locking with hers, Amelia's vision blurred, her body tensed, and an unbearable heat surged through her veins. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the twisted grin of the creature, whispering in her mind, "The curse is eternal." And then everything went black. When the townsfolk found her the next morning, Amelia was lying at the edge of the forest, her clothes torn and her eyes wide with terror. She couldn't remember what had happened, but deep inside, she knew something had changed. That night, as the full moon rose again, the howls echoed through the town once more, louder, closer, and more insistent. The villagers whispered among themselves. Another had been claimed, but this time, something was different. This time, The howls were coming from the village itself, and the curse was far from over. The nights that followed Amelia's return to Black Hollow were uneasy. The townspeople, who once looked at her with passing curiosity, now avoided her gaze entirely. Children whispered about her behind closed doors, calling her the Marked One, while elders shook their heads solemnly whenever she walked by. Amelia could feel it, too. Something wasn't right. Since that night in the forest, her dreams had been invaded by twisted visions of dark, blood-soaked woods and shadowy creatures lurking in the trees. But the worst part wasn't the dreams, it was the lingering feeling they left behind when she woke up. A strange heat that coursed through her veins, a gnawing hunger. She found herself staring at the moon longer each night, feeling an odd connection to its cold, pale light. One evening, unable to sleep, Amelia wandered through the empty streets of Black Hollow. Her steps led her, almost unconsciously, back toward the edge of the woods. As she stood at the tree line, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Jonah, the town's blacksmith, a grizzled man who had always been kind to her since her arrival. But now his eyes were different. Wilder. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Amelia swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Feel what?" "The pull," Jonah replied, stepping closer. "The hunger. It's in you now, Amelia. I've seen it happen before. The woods take you, bit by bit, until you're not you anymore." She backed away, her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" Jonah's eyes glinted in the dim light. "The curse. It's already started. The wolves, they're not just out there, in the woods. They're among us. Some of us. We've been hiding it for years, trying to control it. But when the curse touches you, there's no going back." Amelia shook her head, refusing to believe what she was hearing. "I'm not one of them. I'm not like that." But Jonah's expression darkened. "It doesn't matter what you want. The curse has its own will. It's been in Black Hollow for centuries, and it's hungry. The only way to stop it is to leave before it consumes you." Before Amelia could respond, a chilling howl pierced the night air, far closer than it had ever been. Her blood ran cold as she turned toward the forest. The howls were louder, echoing through the trees, and this time, they weren't alone. Shapes emerged from the darkness, shadows moving through the woods with unnerving speed. They were closing in, dozens of them, their eyes glowing faintly in the night. Jonah grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We need to go now." But Amelia froze, her gaze fixed on the figures advancing toward the village. There was something familiar about them. One of the shapes stopped at the edge of the clearing, stepping into the moonlight. It was the leader, the same werewolf she had seen at the altar. Its eyes, glowing with that unnatural yellow hue, locked onto hers again. And then it spoke, this time, with words that echoed inside her head. "You are ours now, Amelia." Jonah yanked her arm harder, snapping her out of her trance. "There's no time." Together, they ran, sprinting through the narrow streets of Black Hollow. Behind them, the howls grew louder, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against stone. They were being hunted. They reached the blacksmith's forge, slamming the door behind them. Jonah immediately barricaded it, his hands trembling as he lit a lantern. The forge was dimly lit, filled with the scent of smoke and metal. Amelia's breath was ragged, her body trembling with a strange, unfamiliar energy. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonah was silent for a moment, his back against the door as he listened to the approaching growls outside. "There's only one way to break the curse, but it's dangerous." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. "What is it?" "We have to find the origin of the curse, the first werewolf," Jonah said, his voice grim. "The one who started it all. It's said they live deep in the heart of the forest, hidden away in an ancient cave. If we can kill them, the curse will die with them." Amelia's blood turned cold at the thought. The woods were dangerous enough, but to go even deeper, to face the creature that had spawned this nightmare. It seemed impossible, but why hasn't anyone done it before? She asked. Jonah looked away, his jaw clenched. "Because no one who's gone after the first has ever come back." The growling outside grew louder, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed around the forge. Amelia's skin tingled, and she realized with horror that she wasn't just afraid, she was excited. There was a part of her, deep down, that longed for the hunt. Before she could speak, The door shook violently, and a deep, guttural voice growled from the other side. "There's no escape, Amelia. You're one of us now." Jonah looked at her, his eyes filled with both fear and determination. "You have to decide. Will you fight the curse, or will you give in to it?" The door shook again, cracking under the force of the blows from the creatures outside. Amelia's hands trembled as she met Jonah's gaze. The hunger inside her was growing stronger, more insistent. But she wasn't ready to give up her humanity, not yet. "Take me to the cave," she said, her voice steady. Jonah nodded, his expression grim. "Then we have no time to waste." They slipped out the back of the forge, disappearing into the shadows just as the door splintered open behind them. The werewolves poured into the forge, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight, but Amelia and Jonah were already gone, racing toward the heart of the cursed woods. The hunt had only just begun. As they vanished into the forest, a single, ominous howl echoed through the trees long, haunting, and filled with a promise of blood. Somewhere, deep in the darkness, the ancient werewolf stirred, sensing their approach. The curse was not so easily broken, and Amelia's fate was far from sealed. As Amelia and Jonah sprinted deeper into the cursed woods, the darkness around them thickened, and the air grew colder. The oppressive weight of the ancient forest pressed down on them, but they moved quickly, determined to reach the cave before the werewolves closed in. The howls echoed through the trees, but now they were distant, as if the pack was circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. Amelia's senses were sharper than ever. She could hear every rustle in the underbrush, smell the earth and the damp moss beneath her feet. But more than anything, she could feel the pull of the curse, dragging her deeper into its grip. Every step felt like a battle against something that wanted to consume her completely. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center, hidden beneath the shadows of towering trees, was the mouth of a cave. The entrance was wide and jagged, its edges lined with ancient runes carved into the stone. There was a coldness emanating from it, a palpable sense of dread. "This is it," Jonah whispered, his voice tight with tension. "The first werewolf is in there. If we can kill them, the curse will end." Amelia nodded, though fear clawed at her insides. She could feel the curse thrumming in her veins, stronger than ever, but she pushed it down, focusing on what she had to do. She wasn't going to let this curse take her. Not now. Not ever. Together, they entered the cave, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp stone and something far older, something rotten. As they moved deeper, the tunnel widened, and ahead, they saw a faint, flickering light. The cavern opened up into a massive chamber, its walls lined with ancient carvings depicting the rise of the werewolves, their twisted transformation, and the countless lives they had taken. In the center of the chamber, sitting on a stone throne, was a figure, the first werewolf. It was massive, far larger than any creature Amelia had seen before, its body twisted and grotesque, more beast than human. Its fur was matted, its claws long and sharp, and its eyes, those terrible yellow eyes, glowed with a malevolent hunger. But there was something else in those eyes, something deeper, a weariness, an ancient pain that had festered for centuries. The creature rose slowly, its gaze locking onto Amelia. "You have come," it growled, its voice echoing through the cavern, as they all do. Jonah stepped forward, gripping a silver blade in his hand. "We've come to end this curse," he said, his voice firm. The first werewolf laughed, a low, rumbling sound that sent chills down Amelia's spine. "You think killing me will end it?" It stepped closer, its hulking form towering over them. "The curse is not just in me. It is in the blood, in the land, in every soul it has touched. You cannot stop it." Amelia felt the curse inside her flare, a sharp pain coursing through her body, but she stood her ground. "Maybe I can't stop it," she said, her voice steady, "but I can break it." The werewolf snarled, but there was something in its eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. It knew she was different. Jonah moved to strike, but Amelia held up a hand, stopping him. "Wait," she whispered. "This isn't just about killing it." She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the creature. "You weren't always this way," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "You were human once." The werewolf's growl softened, its massive head tilting slightly. "Once," it rumbled, "but that time is long gone." It doesn't have to be, Amelia said. You've lived with this curse for centuries, feeding it, spreading it. But you never wanted this, did you? The creature hesitated, its claws flexing, but it didn't strike. Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the curse swirling around her. And then she did something no one had ever done before. She reached out, placing her hand on the werewolf's fur. The connection was instant pain, hunger, rage, but underneath it all, she felt something else. The remnants of the creature's humanity, buried deep beneath centuries of torment. I can help you, she whispered, but you have to let go. For a long moment, the werewolf didn't move, its breath heavy and labored. Then, slowly, its body began to change. The hulking, monstrous form shrank, its fur receding, its claws retracting. Before their eyes, the ancient creature transformed, its twisted, cursed form melting away until, finally, it stood before them as a man. He was old, his body frail, but his eyes no longer glowing yellow were filled with a deep, profound sorrow. It is done, he whispered, his voice weak. Amelia stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The curse inside her had quieted, its hold loosening. The man once the first werewolf fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I never wanted this, he said, his voice broken. I've been trapped for so long. Jonah, still holding the silver blade, stepped forward cautiously. Is it over? He asked. The man nodded slowly. The curse. It's broken. You freed me. As the man spoke, the air in the cavern seemed to shift. The oppressive weight that had hung over them lifted, and the darkness that had clung to the cave for centuries began to fade. Outside, the howls of the werewolves stopped, replaced by a profound silence. Amelia felt the change immediately. The hunger, the pull of the curse, was gone. She was free. In the days that followed, Black Hollow began to heal. The werewolves who had once roamed the forest were no more, their curse lifted, and the villagers who had lived in fear for generations could finally rest easy. Amelia stayed in the village, but she no longer felt the strange unease that had haunted her since her arrival. The curse was broken, and with it, the shadow that had loomed over Black Hollow for so long. As for the man who had once been the first werewolf, he disappeared into the woods one final time. No one knew where he went, but Amelia believed he had finally found peace. And though the curse had been lifted, the memory of what had happened, the horrors that had plagued Black Hollow for centuries, would never be forgotten. But Amelia, for the first time since she had come to the village, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, and with it, the knowledge that she had faced the darkness and won.